It wasn't the cold of the hospital corridor that stayed with Serena Blackwood years later. It wasn't the antiseptic smell, or the way the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the waiting room chairs. What stayed with her, what she still couldn't shake, was the sound of laughter, her laughter. Serena had been in surgery for 47 minutes when she heard it, or so the nurses told her afterward. She wasn't conscious. Her body had stopped cooperating somewhere between the second and third hour of labor, her blood pressure dropping in a way that made the young resident's hands go visibly still on the monitor screen. She didn't hear the doctors calling her name. She didn't feel them working to bring her back, but some had been standing just outside the operating room doors, and that someone had laughed. She found out 3 days later. When she woke up, the first thing Serena saw when she opened her eyes was the water-stained ceiling tile above her head. The second thing was her mother, Patricia Blackwood, asleep in the recliner beside the bed with her reading glasses still on and a crossword puzzle folded in her lap. The third thing she noticed was the empty chair on the other side of the room, the one that should have had her husband in it. "Mom," she said, and the word came out as a scrape of sound, barely audible. Patricia was awake in an instant, the particular alertness of a woman who had been sleeping lightly for 3 days, listening for exactly this. "Oh, sweetheart." She was at the bedside immediately, her hand finding Serena's without hesitation. "You're awake, thank God. It's been 3 days, Serena." 3 days. The number didn't make sense yet. "The baby," Serena said. "My baby." Patricia's face shifted in the careful, practiced way of someone delivering news they'd been rehearsing. "She's in the NICU. She came early but she's breathing on her own and the nurses say she's strong. Her name, you hadn't decided yet, so they've been calling her Baby Girl Blackwood." A daughter. Serena had a daughter, she cried, though she had no real sense of where the tears were coming from. Everything hurt. Her throat felt like it had been scraped clean. Her abdomen was tight with a pain she couldn't locate the source of. But she had a daughter, and her daughter was breathing, and for approximately 40 seconds that was the only thing in the world. Then she asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Where's Callum?" The silence that followed lasted a fraction of a second longer than it should have. Patricia reached up and pressed her own glasses more firmly onto her nose, a habit Serena recognized as her mother buying time. "He was here the first day, for a few hours, and then he left." Patricia said it evenly, the way she said things she was working very hard to say calmly. "He said he needed air. He said hospitals made him anxious. He said." She stopped. "There are things I need to tell you. But not yet. You've only just woken up, Mom." "Serena, tell me now." Patricia looked at her daughter, at the IV lines and the monitor leads, at the pallor that still hadn't fully left her face. And then she sat down on the edge of the bed and told her. There had been a woman in the waiting room during Serena's surgery, a woman named Devika Anand, who worked in the same architectural firm as Callum, who Callum had described to Serena exactly once as just someone from the office you'd find her a bit intense. Devika had been sitting beside Callum in the surgical waiting room when the emergency alarm sounded, when the nurses had run past, when the doctor had come out in the middle of the procedure to ask Callum to sign a form authorizing additional intervention. A nurse named Greta, who'd been on her break at the far end of the waiting room, later told Patricia that she had watched the whole thing. She hadn't known who these people were. She'd just been watching because there was nothing else to do, and because the alarm had made everyone in the waiting room go very still. When the doctor rushed out with the consent forms, Greta said, the man had gone white. He'd stood up fast, knocking his coffee over, and his face had been genuinely terrified. She could say that for him. But the woman beside him had watched the doctor and then looked at the operating room doors, and something had passed over her face that Greta had spent 3 days trying to describe accurately. It wasn't that she looked happy exactly. Greta had told Patricia the morning after it happened, but she looked relieved, and then she smiled, and then she made a sound. Greta had paused. It was short, she covered her mouth right away, but it was a laugh. "I've worked in hospitals for 11 years, I know what that sounds like." Callum had heard it too. He'd looked at Devika, and she'd composed herself, and something had passed between them that Greta couldn't read, and then he'd sat back down. He had not gone in. He had not followed the doctor back to the doors. He had sat back down beside Devika Anand and stayed there while his wife's heart stopped and was restarted on the other side of a set of swinging doors. Serena listened to all of this without saying anything. She was aware of the monitor beside her bed, registering her pulse, which was climbing, and she made a deliberate effort to breathe. "The nurse reported it," Patricia said. "There's a record. And..." She hesitated. "The hospital has security cameras in the waiting room. The patient advocate mentioned it might be worth knowing they exist." "He left with her," Serena said. It wasn't a question. She had already understood the shape of the story. Patricia looked at her hands. "The security footage shows them leaving together. About an hour after you were stabilized." Serena thought about her daughter down the hall in the NICU, breathing on her own, called baby girl Blackwood, waiting. She thought about Callum, who had helped her paint the nursery 3 weekends ago, who had stood in the baby goods store for 40 minutes debating the merits of 2 nearly identical car seats, who had pressed his palm flat against her belly when the baby kicked and said, in a voice she'd never heard from him before, "We made that." She thought about Devika Anand, who she had met exactly once at a firm holiday party, who had a bright practiced smile and very precise eyeliner, and who had laughed, quietly, quickly, coverable, when Serena Blackwood was dying. "I need to see my daughter," Serena said. They brought her by wheelchair 2 days later, when the doctors were satisfied she could make the trip. The NICU was quieter than she'd expected, full of the steady sound of machines and the particular held-breath quality of rooms where everything is precarious. Her daughter was in the 3rd incubator on the left. She weighed 4 pounds, 11 ounces. She had Serena's mother's nose and Serena's own mouth already set in a firm, slightly skeptical expression. "She looks annoyed," Serena said. The NICU nurse, a compact woman named Bev, smiled. "She does a bit. She's been very determined about everything so far. I get the sense she'd leave on her own if she could figure out the door." Serena put her finger through the incubator port, and her daughter's hand closed around it with a grip that was frankly embarrassingly strong for someone who weighed less than a bag of flour. "Hi," Serena said. "I'm sorry it took me a while." She named her Margot, not the spelling she'd originally planned, that had been part of the list she and Callum had argued over pleasantly for months, but a version that felt like hers alone. Margot Claire Blackwood, because Claire had been her grandmother's name and because Sarthina needed at least one thing in that hospital room to belong entirely to her. Callum came back on a Thursday. He texted first, which struck Serena later as the detail that told her everything she needed to know about where they were. 7 years of marriage, and he texted to ask if he could come to the hospital, as if she were a colleague, as if visiting his daughter in the NICU were a meeting to be scheduled. She texted back, "Fine." He arrived looking like a man who had not been sleeping well, which Serena found she could not bring herself to feel sorry about. He was unshaven and his collar was slightly wrong, and he held a paper coffee cup in each hand, an offering she recognized, a way to walk into the room with his hands already occupied so the first moment wouldn't require a decision about whether to touch her. He set one cup on the bedside table. "I got you the tea, chamomile. I didn't know if you were Callum." He stopped. "I know about Devika," she said. "I know you were with her. I know what she did in that waiting room, and I know you left with her." He sat down slowly in the chair by the window, the one her mother had barely left for 3 days. He set his own coffee on the sill. "Serena, I'm not asking for an explanation right now," she said. "I'm telling you what I know. So we can skip the part where you try to figure out how much I know and calibrate accordingly." He flinched. She had always been good at identifying exactly what people were doing. It was, he had told her early in their relationship, one of the things he loved most about her. It was, she now suspected, also one of the things that had made her inconvenient to lie to and therefore easier to leave. "How long?" she said. 8 months. She had expected him to say 3, maybe 4. 8 months took the breath out of her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "The firm retreat in March," she said, not a question. He looked at the window. Yes. She had been 5 months pregnant in March. She had spent that weekend assembling flat-pack furniture with her friend Roberta, because Callum was away and she'd gotten impatient waiting. She had sent him a photo of herself triumphant on the finished glider chair, a cup of decaf in hand, and he had responded with a heart emoji and the words, "Miss you so much." 8 months. "I want you to leave," she said. "Not just the hospital, the house. I want you to make arrangements." "Serena, I know this is. I'm not finished." She kept her voice level, which cost her more than she would tell him. "I want to discuss Margot's custody in a setting with lawyers present. I'm not going to fight you on reasonable access, because she deserves a father who wants to be one, and I'll give you the opportunity to prove that. But I need you to understand something." She looked at him directly. "You sat in that waiting room while I died. My heart stopped, and you stayed in your seat. I'm not going to recover from that, and I'm not going to pretend I am. So whatever you thought you were going to come here and say, I need you to reconsider whether it's worth saying." He cried, eventually. She watched it happen with a detachment that scared her a little. She wasn't cold by nature. She had a daughter 4 rooms away who had her grandmother's nose and her mother's stubbornness, and she intended to be a person worth knowing. But she found, sitting in that hospital bed, that she had used up whatever she might have felt on his behalf already. It had been metabolized somehow, converted into something else, not forgiveness, not even anger exactly, but a kind of clarifying certainty. She had not caused this. She was going to be fine. He left without saying anything significant, which was, in its way, the most honest thing he'd done. Serena's lawyer was a woman named Constance Fairley, who had been recommended by a colleague with the specific words, She is frighteningly thorough. Constance had steel gray hair cut very short, and wore reading glasses on a chain that she deployed with the efficiency of someone who had decided decades ago that the glasses were a tool, not an aesthetic choice. She reviewed the security footage with the measured expression of a person who had seen most things and was not easily rattled. The footage shows her laughing, Constance said. Yes, while you were being resuscitated, yes, and your husband remained seated, yes. Constance made a note. We'll be requesting full documentation from the hospital. The nursing incident report is particularly useful. She looked up. I want to be clear with you about what's realistic. This footage and these records are most useful in custody proceedings, where they speak to judgment and character. In divorce proceedings, Ontario is a no-fault province. The affair itself doesn't affect the division of assets. What affects the division of assets is how assets were accumulated, spent, and structured. So we'll need financial disclosure from both sides. I understand. What I can tell you, Constance said, capping her pen, is that in terms of custody, the documented abandonment during a medical emergency, while his spouse was delivering his child while his child was in acute distress, is not going to play well, not in front of any judge I've ever appeared before. Serena thought of Margot's grip, the way she'd held on. Good, she said. Then let's start. The paperwork took the rest of the morning. Serena signed her name 11 times in various places and answered questions about bank accounts and property and the joint investment account they'd opened 4 years ago for the express purpose of saving for a house with a proper backyard. She answered all of them in the same even tone she'd used with Callum, which was still costing her, but less so now. The cost was coming down. Something was calcifying in her usefully. Callum's first lawyer sent a letter that attempted to characterize the security footage as misinterpreted. Constance's response was 4 paragraphs and demolished it so completely that Serena read it twice just for the experience. Margot came home 6 weeks after she was born. She was 5 pounds 14 ounces by then, and had developed opinions. She had opinions about the angle at which bottles were presented to her, and about the specific blanket she preferred. Yellow, not the green one, under no circumstances the green one, and about the amount of time she was willing to spend in a car seat before the injustice of it demanded vocal commentary. She was, Serena thought, completely exhausting, and approximately the best thing that had ever happened to her. Her mother had moved in for the first 2 months, occupying the guest room and periodically making meals that appeared in the refrigerator as if assembled by very organized elves. Serena's friend Roberta came over twice a week and held Margot, so Serena could shower for more than 4 minutes and sit quietly in the kitchen with a real cup of tea, and the specific kind of silence that only comes from knowing someone else is handling it. You look like you're managing, Roberta said one evening, watching Serena attempt to fold a truly improbable number of small onesies. I look terrible, Serena said. You look like a woman who has been awake since 3 a.m. and made it to 4 in the afternoon without losing her mind. That's managing. Roberta picked up a corner of the laundry and started folding. Have you heard from him? Through Constant. He wants to do the first supervised visit next month. Are you going to let him? Serena folded a particularly small sock. She deserves to know who he is, whether he's capable of being her father. That's information she'll need eventually. It's not up to me to make that decision for her forever. She paused. But it's supervised for the first 6 months, minimum, and he knows why. Roberta nodded, folding competently. And her? Serena knew who she meant. She posted something last week. I saw it by accident. Someone in my feed liked it. One of those, very vague posts. Something about choosing authenticity and releasing what doesn't serve you. Choosing authenticity, Roberta repeated. She has a new handle. She's trying to rebrand as a wellness person apparently. The comments were, Serena stopped. It doesn't matter. She's not relevant to my life. But she laughed. I know she laughed. Serena set the folded onesies in the basket, very neatly. I've decided I'm not going to spend energy on her. What she did, that's hers. That's who she is. I don't need to watch her face consequences. I just need to not be around her. Roberta looked at her for a moment. When did you become this sordid? I'm not sordid, Serena said. I cried in the car for 20 minutes on Tuesday because I couldn't find a parking spot near the pharmacy and everything stacked up, and then I parked and got out and bought the diapers and came home. She picked up Margot's yellow blanket and folded it carefully. That's what I'm doing. Parking and getting out. She started writing about it in December. Not publicly. Just in the Notes app on her phone at 2 in the morning, the way you do things when the baby is finally asleep and your brain refuses to follow. She wrote about the waiting room. About the sound she hadn't even heard but somehow knew. About waking up to a ceiling tile and an empty chair. About the moment she'd understood what the shape of her life was going to have to become. Her friend Simon, who worked in digital media, read a few of the entries she shared with him and said, carefully, Have you considered that other people might need to read this? It's not polished, she said. It's not supposed to be polished. That's why it works. She thought about it for 3 months. She talked to Constance, who had opinions about what could and couldn't be said publicly while proceedings were ongoing. She talked to her mother, who said, "I think you have always been better at talking about hard things than you give yourself credit for." She talked to Margot, who was 5 months old and could not contribute to the conversation but seemed interested in the ceiling fan in a way that was probably not related. In March, exactly a year after the firm retreat in March, a fact she was aware of and decided to metabolize rather than dwell on, she posted the first piece. It was about waking up in the ICU and asking where her daughter was, about the specific quality of a NICU at 3 in the morning, the held breath hush of it, about putting her finger through the incubator port and her daughter's grip closing around it. It was not about Callum. It was not about Devika. It was about what it felt like to be a person who had nearly not been a person anymore, and had come back to find a 4-pound daughter waiting. 400 people read it the first day. Then 4,000. Then after someone shared it in a parenting forum, 40,000. The comments were something she hadn't prepared for. Not in the way she hadn't prepared for labor, where she'd read the books and attended the classes, and still been caught off guard by the reality of it. But in the way she hadn't prepared for something she didn't know was coming at all. Women writing about their own waiting rooms, their own empty chairs, their own moments of realizing that the person they'd built their life around had decided not to be there. Women writing about the specific loneliness of recovering alone and being told by everyone that they seemed to be coping so well. She wrote a second piece, then a third. She started a Substack, initially just as an archive and then as an actual thing with actual subscribers who left comments that made her sit in her car and cry. Not the bad crying, the other kind. Constance messaged her after the 4th piece, "Nothing legally problematic, well done." Simon messaged her, "I need you to let me help you build this into something." She thought about it for a week, consulted her mother, took Margot for a walk around the block twice without her phone, and then said yes. The divorce was finalized 17 months after Margot was born. Serena kept the house and a fair share of the joint assets. Callum was granted access every other weekend, supervised for the first 6 months, unsupervised after that, contingent on his completion of a co-parenting course that Constance had, Serena privately thought, weaponized with extraordinary precision. He completed the course. He showed up on time mostly. He was awkward with Margot in a way that seemed genuine rather than performative. The awkwardness of someone who knew he'd missed the beginning and was trying to locate himself in the middle of a story already in progress. The supervised visits had been documented meticulously. He had been adequate, not good, not natural, not the father pressed pale-faced against the incubator glass at 3 in the morning, but present. Attempting. Serena decided that was enough to work with, not for herself, for Margot. She did not think about Vivekanand with any regularity. Occasionally something surfaced, someone tagging her in a screenshot of a post or a mutual acquaintance mentioning offhandedly that she'd left the firm, that things had not gone well in whatever direction her life had turned. Serena would look at these for approximately 3 seconds and then close the screen. She had made a decision about where her attention lived, and it was not there. The Substack hit 20,000 subscribers the month before Margot's 2nd birthday. Simon had built her a proper website by then, and she'd done 2 podcast interviews. One about the NICU experience specifically, one about rebuilding after an unexpected life rupture, which was how she'd started talking about it, because it was accurate and because it was hers. The second interview got picked up and shared widely, in the way that things occasionally are when they say something that turns out to be what a lot of people needed to hear. She talked about the empty chair. She talked about parking and getting out. She talked about her daughter's grip and what it had meant to have something hold on to her in a moment when she had almost not been there to be held. Her inbox was full for 2 weeks. She read every message, though she couldn't respond to all of them. One of them, from a woman in Winnipeg named Bet, who had been divorced for 8 months and was writing from a kitchen table at midnight, said, "I didn't know I could be the person who survived this. You're showing me that's a thing that can happen." Serena printed that one out and put it on the refrigerator, at Margot's approximate eye level. Margot at 22 months was not able to read it, but she frequently pointed at it and said something that sounded like dat. Serena had decided to interpret this as approval. She met Edmund Zhao at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, the same hospital where Margot had spent the first 6 weeks of her life. He was there because his company donated annually. He'd explained this later, over coffee that neither of them had planned to have that evening, with the slightly self-deprecating tone of a man who was aware that, "I was invited because my company gives money to things," was not a wildly romantic origin story. He was a structural engineer, which Serena found quietly funny given the circumstances she did not yet share with him. He had been on his own for 4 years, following a relationship that had ended, he said, with very little drama, and a great deal of mutual recognition, that they had both been trying to fit into shapes that didn't fit them. He had a daughter from that relationship, 9 years old, who lived primarily with her mother and spent alternating weeks with him, and apparently had very strong opinions about what constituted an adequate breakfast. What does she consider inadequate? Serena asked. Anything I make, Edmund said, with the rueful ease of someone who has accepted this verdict. She tolerates my scrambled eggs if there's enough hot sauce. I take it as a win. She liked him. She hadn't expected to like someone so specifically or so quickly. She was wary of it. She had reasons to be wary, and she was not embarrassed about having those reasons. But she also found, sitting across from him in a hospital fundraiser that had turned into an accidental 2-hour conversation, that the wariness was something she could be honest about. I'm not looking for something complicated, she said eventually. Neither am I. My daughter is too. She's the primary thing. Anyone who comes into my life has to understand that clearly. My daughter is 9 and also the primary thing, Edmund said. I understand clearly. She gave him her number. She didn't hear from him for 4 days, which turned out to be exactly the right amount of time. Not so fast it felt careless, not so long it felt pointed. They had dinner 3 weeks later. She told him about Callum on the second dinner, not the whole story, the shape of it, the broad strokes, enough to be honest without making him responsible for managing her history. He listened without filling the silence with reassurance, which she appreciated more than she could easily explain. When she was done he said, "That's a lot to have gone through. Not I can't imagine or you're so strong or any of the other things people said well-meaningly that always made her feel slightly translated. Just that's a lot." It was, she said. "I'm okay now." "I can see that you are," he said. "But those things can both be true." She thought about that for several days afterward. Edmund met Margot for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in a park, at Serena's suggestion and on her timeline, with a casual framing that involved no pressure and a backup plan if Margot decided she was not interested. Margot, at 26 months, was interested in virtually everything that moved and a significant portion of what didn't. And she examined Edmund with the focused scrutiny of someone conducting a professional evaluation. He had brought, without being instructed to and apparently on instinct, a small stuffed animal that looked like a beaver with an expression of mild surprise. He offered it without ceremony. Margot took it. She then walked 3 feet away and sat down in the grass with it and appeared to consider whether it met her standards. "She's assessing," Serena said. "I can see that. I'm nervous." "Don't be. She approved the sourdough delivery guy last week. Her standards are high but fair." Margot came back with the beaver. She had decided apparently that it was acceptable, and held it up toward Edmund. This was, Serena had learned, her daughter's method of sharing, which was less about giving and more about showing. "I have this thing. I am choosing to let you know about it." "Thank you," Edmund said seriously. "He's very distinguished." Margot said something in a language that was approximately English and sat down between them in the grass. Edmund looked at Serena. Serena looked at him. "Okay," she said, and she meant several things by it at once. 2 years after Margot was born, Serena sat on the back deck of the house. Her house with the mortgage in and the garden she had planted entirely herself over one manic weekend in May when she needed something to do with her hands, and watched her daughter attempt to identify birds. Margot was deeply interested in birds. She was also deeply incorrect about most of them. "Duck," Margot said, pointing at a sparrow. "Close," Serena said. "Duck," Margot said again more firmly. "Not really duck," Margot said, with the tone of someone who has made her position clear and considers further debate beneath her. Serena's phone was on the table beside her with a message from Edmund that she'd read twice and would respond to after dinner. Her Substack had subscribers in 6 provinces and 4 other countries. She'd gotten an email that week from a literary agent in Toronto who wanted to talk about a book, and she had not yet decided what she thought about that. Her mother was coming for dinner on Sunday. Constance had sent a cheerful quarterly update, indicating that all remaining proceedings were formally closed, and she was, Constance's words, legally a free woman, which had struck Serena as the most satisfying sentence she'd read in recent memory. She thought about the hospital corridor sometimes. She thought about the waiting room chair that had been empty. She thought about waking up and understanding, before anyone had said a word, that something had changed and she was going to have to learn what. She did not think of it as something that had happened to her anymore. It had happened. She was not the kind of person who found meaning in trauma or believed that difficult things were secretly gifts. It had happened, it had been terrible, and she had moved through it and come out somewhere she had not previously been. Here, for instance, this deck. This sparrow that Margot was insisting on calling a duck bird, Serena offered as a compromise. Margot considered this. Duck bird, she said finally, which was not accurate but was, Serena felt, a reasonable negotiating position. She picked her daughter up and held her, and Margot pointed at the sky, and Serena looked where she was pointing, and above the fence line the evening light was doing something very particular to the clouds, turning them a soft, specific gold. She had not chosen this. She had not planned it, had not built toward it, had not known, lying in a hospital bed looking at a water-stained ceiling tile, that this was what was on the other side. You didn't get to know that in advance. You just had to park the car and get out and buy the diapers and come home, and keep doing that until the version of your life you'd actually been meant to have started to take its shape around you. Margot said something that was probably not a real word but sounded like one, pointing still at the gold-edged clouds. I know, Serena said. I see it too.